Welcome to the Shortway Show. So happy to have you here this evening. Yes, it is a little bit past 7 p.m. on the East Coast. So what does that mean? You got to look at me. I know you don't want to, but you kind of got to. Sorry, just how it works. I'm so happy that you have decided to give me a few minutes of your evening. Tonight, I am talking to someone who is super interesting about topics that I know you have heard about before, and you probably want to hear about more. It is the idea of, is the media, is fashion, is our culture still tokenizing Black people, specifically Black women, but I think Black people in general? Is that true? Should we care? What can we do about it? And talking with me tonight is an author, the author of Token Black Girl. She's also a DEI consultant, the one, the only Danielle Prescod. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I loved what you had to say in your book, and I think it's a very interesting way. And for those who don't know, Danielle kind of grew up in not a traditional, or what we would think of as a more common Black neighborhood, right? She grew up in a neighborhood that was a little bit different than like I grew up in. I grew up in the South Bronx. And then though, I went off to a neighborhood out in Long Island, which was much more middle class. My friends went overnight from being almost all Black to being all white, almost overnight. So a little bit of a challenge there. But I guess the piece that you bring up in your book, which I think is very interesting, and for those of you who want to follow her, please head on over to Twitter, Danielle Prescod, if you would, on Twitter. That's DAN, if you're listening in the podcast, IELLEPRESCOD. And you can check out her book and everything else that she's doing. So, but you bring up the idea that the token Black girl seems from the outsider to be an equal. Like you see, oh, she's part of the team, she's part of the crew. But in reality, she's never the main character.
Yeah.
So what does that say to our society or to young girls who are watching?
I think it makes it difficult, at least for me, it made it difficult to center myself, to think that, okay, I can be the hero and the love interest. I can be something other than the comedic relief, right, in terms of like how we're thinking about social dynamics and group dynamics.
So, but what about the idea, right? When I grew up, initially in the 70s, there were a couple of shows that were Black centered, but not that many. Good Times in the 70s. I'm old enough to remember Good Times. I watched Good Times, right? Yeah. The Jeffersons, right? I mean, they were kind of Black centered, right? But I think the explosion where I think more white America watched was, Fresh Prince, Family Matters, Cosby, before we thought he was a rapist, right? But before those, right? Before that time. And I feel like a lot of Martin, I think a lot of white people, white America did watch those shows. And I feel in those shows, weren't the centered heroes, weren't they all Black? Weren't many of the women even in those shows, weren't they heroic? Whether they were the working mom or the stay-at-home mom or the lawyer, weren't they all heroes?
Yes, but the problem is that those shows represent segregation in a way. The idea is that it's separate, but not equal. So they're not integrated. So if these white people are simply observing in a voyeuristic way and then not actually able to interact with real Black people, not characters, real Black people on a day-to-day, daily basis, you start to have stereotypes form. You start to have these kind of narratives form that's like, oh, well, I already know simply because I watched Martin. I don't need to have a conversation with you. I already saw this episode of The Cosby Show, where it becomes, almost like looking in a museum. Like we are not really experiencing anything, but we get to have an observation that is like separated and dictated by other forces, right? Like when you go to a museum, there are a lot of factors that are controlled by the institution. Same with television.
Sure.
There are a lot of factors that are controlled by the institution. Can't swear, can't have nudity, can't do all of these other things. And so because of that, it limits your experience with the material. And that's not real life.
Though, but in other words, say I'm a white guy in the 80s or the 70s, and I don't really have any black friends because of redlining and because of institutional situations. Blacks in the schools are segregated. So I don't really meet black people, right? I'm some white guy in the 70s, 80s. I have a couple, but I meet maybe some friends at work, maybe, right? Maybe the guy who drives a truck that delivers something at my work or something, right? Maybe. So I say hi to Carl, and that's it, right? That's the black guy that I know, right? That's the only one I know. Doesn't watching Cosby or Family Matters, does it make me more open to having a black friend or no? In other words, does that prep me, right? So that I can now not be scared, right? Because I might have been watching Cops too, right? So maybe I'm also watching Cops and I'm scared of the black guy who's gonna, all the black guys are criminals, right? So maybe I'm scared of that because of that stereotype that's also been shown to me. Does the Cosby or whatever, does that help me to say, you know what? No, I should try to have a black friend or no?
I don't think so. Because I don't think you're really engaging with the community on like a level that is humanizing, like enough where it would make sense to, like, you know, when you think about what friendship is, like, I'm like,
right.
Yeah, you can't be friends with a character, or you can't want to start a friendship because you like a character in something.
Well, the only reason why I say it is I look at myself when I was growing up. And the one thing that's been common that still, when I was a kid, the two or three things that have been common when I was a kid till today, when it comes to culture, particularly boys, Star Trek and Star Wars, those two, right? That's been, even though the franchises have changed, but culturally, there's always been a Star Trek and or a Star Wars since I was a kid until today. So I look at Star Trek. When I look at Star Trek, I remember when I was a kid, Captain Kirk was the captain of the Enterprise, right? He was the top guy there. And eventually when Deep Space Nine came out, there was a black captain. His name was Ben Sisko. For those who aren't geeks, you wouldn't know that, but you Star Trek geeks know that. He was a black character. His name was Ben Sisko. That was the character name, right? So when that character came out, I remember going to and being around Star Trek geeks, and there were white guys who would put on blackface to look like Sisko. I'm not joking. Like the character Sisko was bald, right? The character was bald. So they put in a bald cap, brown, and then paint their faces brown so they could look like Benjamin Sisko. And when I saw that, I wasn't upset. I didn't see that. I didn't see it as blackface. I saw it as they want to be him. That's how I saw it. Now, I bring this up to you because this is clearly years ago. This is literally decades ago, right? This is not today. This is decades ago. Looking back decades ago, were those people racist? Were they not racist? Were they ignorant? Were they trying? Where do you see those people who were doing that? How would you see them looking back, from today?
I mean, I think it's all of the above. I don't think it's like that binary, but I do think that what is kind of baked into that is an ignorance about history. And that is largely due to who controls history and how it gets told.
Sure.
And also, yes, it is inherently racist to wear blackface because I put this in my book, there is no reverse. I cannot decide to just be white simply because I want to be. So you are forced to embody, behave, whatever Black characters are up for representation. So, I talk about in my book, like the Spice Girls were really big when I was growing up.
Yeah, I remember.
Like, well, you have to be Scary Spice. Well, it doesn't matter if you feel like Baby, doesn't matter if you like Ginger's outfit, doesn't matter if you identify with, you must be scary. Whereas the privilege in being able to say, oh, I'm just going to try this identity on for a night. And really, it's not even trying the identity on because there's none of the real weight that comes with being this Black captain. you get to circumvent all of that. And that is inherently unequal. So
I remember though, when I was a little kid, and I'm going back to I'm purposely doing a dichotomy between today and before, right? When I was in the Bronx as a little kid, I didn't have any white friends. My friends were either black or Hispanic, right? Most were black. There were some Hispanic friends where I grew up as a kid. We liked the old TV show. Some of you, again, I'm dating myself. Some of the older audience may remember that, Starsky and Hutch. It was a TV show on ABC. It was two white cops, and they were the cool guys on TV. We used to watch on TV at night, right? We thought it was cool. So me and my friend, both black, we played Starsky and Hutch. So I was Starsky and he was Hutch. So we were the white guys. Now, this kind of goes to something else you bring up in your book, the idea of, can we make characters another color, and are people okay with it or not? In our world, we didn't mind being the white guys. To be forward, there weren't that many black heroes for us to be. There were some, right? I actually lived where I lived. There was a movie theater called the Earl, which was a second-rate movie theater where I lived in the Bronx, and they played tons of blaxploitation movies, right? Blackula and stuff like that from the 60s and the 70s. So I did see some black actors, Pam Grier and of that world, Jim Brown. So for those of you old enough, you remember those. They were kind of a black heroes of the 70s and maybe the early 80s, or maybe late 70s, early 70s. So I did see some of those. So what is the difference in me and my friend playing two white cops and you wanting to play the white Spice Girl? Well, there were more than one white Spice Girl. So one of the white Spice Girls.
Yeah. Well, the difference is, like you mentioned, there was no other alternative. Like, if you want to be the hero, if that's what you want to do, like that's who you're going to have to become. The problem is not, really amongst children, but it's like when it gets to adulthood, what does that end up meaning? And a lot of it happens to protection, like there's nothing available. So Black children are very used to the experience of having to empathize, having to see themselves reflected in white characters. But because of the way that white supremacy functions, white people are not able to do the same. They think that something is tainted if they change a character's race. So, for example, in a few weeks, we'll see this happen when Halle Bailey is Little Mermaid. She's now the new Little Mermaid comes out. And there have been many Reddit threads, many Twitter threads, many Disney diehards super angry about the fact that this Little Mermaid is Black, that she has dreadlocks, that they're red, but like it doesn't look like the cartoon Ariel. And like, to me, these people seem insane because I'm like, you're arguing about a fantastical character, like not even like a real historical character, of which we can get into like the way that those have been miscast for many years. But I'm like, you're arguing about a mermaid who was a cartoon.
But let me push back a bit on this one if I could. And I go back to my Captain Kirk thing. And this is, nothing, this part will not have anything to do with race. This part I will talk about will just be about recasting. When they rebooted Star Trek, the movie, I was a very big Star Trek fan as a kid. Loved it tremendously, watched all the shows, big deal for me, loved it. Loved the new ones, loved them all, loved Star Trek. When they recast the movies, well, of course, when they recast the movies, they can't bring the old actors back. They were all in their 70s, right? So they can't bring the actors. They got new actors. So what they did is they said, okay, we're recasting the actors, but when we recast them, it's a secondary universe. So it's not the same universe. So your characters will exist, but in this universe, these are the actors. Now, that may seem like a small thing, but in my geek world of sci-fi, I was okay with that because I felt like they weren't erasing my characters, right? Like my characters could exist. These are new ones. Okay, they look different. So I guess, isn't there a part of someone who's saying, no, don't make this person Black or Hispanic or whatever, because that's erasing what I thought as real, right? It's erasing it. It's not making it, it's making me feel disrespected because I saw Ariel, like obviously not me, I don't care about Ariel, right? I'm too old for that, right? But anyway, I'm assuming some kid saw Ariel as the white girl with the red hair. And then now, well, she's not now. So you're erasing my childhood. You're disrespecting me in my childhood. Couldn't it be some of that too, or no?
I don't think so, simply because The Little Mermaid came out in 89 or something like that. It was like between 87 and 89. And so it is really a function of that time. Who was in power, who was able to have those decisions be made, who were the voices in the room. And it's not necessarily reflective of anything but that choice. And so now other people are in the room and they're able to make a different choice. And the canon still exists. You still have The Little Mermaid. It is on Disney Plus. It is available to be streamed. You might even be lucky enough to have a VHS player, so you can watch it. But the problem is when people are trying to stop the new one from being made or seen or changes happening. Canon still exists. The canon.
Yes, but aren't you now changing the canon now? I mean, if the canon says, I mean, I'll go back to I'll use your story in the book, which I love the story that you talk about. You were a big fan. I assume you still are, but I know you were a big fan of the Harry Potter series. And are you still a fan?
Yes, I love those books.
Awesome. So a fan of the Harry Potter series. And you bring up the idea that people were talking about whether Hermione should be black or not, or is black or not, right? Whether she's black. And that in the book, they never actually said that she's white. But then when they made the movies, she was white. So does that mean that Hermione is white? Or does that mean it doesn't matter? Or was the casting in the movie wrong because they never said she was white? So maybe she was actually black. Where does that land in this idea of canon?
I think that when we're thinking about the effects of white supremacy, the white identity is almost always in parentheses unless it's explicitly stated. I think Toni Morrison said the quote that like, only white people get to be American. Everyone else is hyphenated, right? So you have to say African American or Black American or, Cuban American. You have to like differentiate people, whereas like someone who is white simply gets to exist as American. And that is usually how identities are expressed, especially within literature. And I write this in the book, if J.K. Rowling had wanted us to know that Hermione was Black, she would have distinctly described her as she does the other Black characters in the book. There are several. And she makes a point to say these people are Black. Now, what ended up happening was someone took some creative liberties when casting the live action play, and grown-up Hermione ended up being Black, and it became such a like massive scandal that J.K. Rowling had to say that, you know what, I didn't actually specify, and so I'm fine with this character being made Black. Like, they have my approval. This is something that I am saying I'm okay with, just to call off some of the craziness.
So let me touch two pieces there. What if she had said no? What if she had said, no, I'm sorry, when I wrote Hermione, she was white. That's how I wrote her. I'm the author. I wrote her as white. And you really got to make her white. Or the reverse. If you said, no, it's not that I didn't say she is Black. I wrote her as Black, and the movie screwed up, and she's Black. What if she had said either of those two things? If the author had actually said, she is this, would that change your mind on this? Would that change the cultural reference? Would it matter if the author had been definitive and said, no, she is Black, or no, she is white?
Yeah, I think it matters both ways, but I don't think it affects the, iconography of the character. I think she's a bright girl, technically, like she comes from Muggles, and it's incredible that she is a talented witch. All of these things still would be true, but how she moves through the world and how she experiences the world differs whether or not she's white or Black. And that is like what the missing understanding is, I think, for some people. It's not that we are, it doesn't change our experience of her, but it changes how other people can see her, because most white people are not used to seeing themselves reflected in people of other races.
Okay, so is this a Western thing? In other words, if I go to, say, someplace like, I don't know, East Africa, or maybe Nigeria, which actually has a film industry, right? Nigeria has a film industry. I think Kenya has a small film industry. Egypt has a massive film industry, right? So if I go to someplace like that, it creates lots of media. Egypt creates a lot of media. Nigeria creates lots of media. If I go there, isn't the idea of Hermione being black or white or whatever, isn't it going to change? Right? If I'm in Nigeria and I do a play about, I don't know, the American Revolution, the odds are everybody's black. I'm in Nigeria, so the odds are everybody's black. Does that matter?
Well, I'm American.
What I'm saying is,
so I don't really know how everything works, but I will say that, white supremacy's first cousin is colonization, and that's global, and that is everywhere. And the prioritizing the deference to whiteness, to a European standard, it happens everywhere, no matter where you are. Yes, even in Nigeria. Yes, even in Egypt. And so, yeah, I think that does matter.
Well, you bring up the idea not only of racism, but you also bring the idea of colorism, right? You bring up both of those things in your book. You bring up the idea that even within the black community, there is colorism, right?
Of course.
And I've experienced it. I'm very light-skinned, as you can see, right? So I've experienced it. I see it often, right? That there is a colorism that people don't call racism. I kind of think they're both racist, to be forward with you. That's my opinion, but people would want to differentiate. I get it. But I feel like you see that also, and within the black community, that colorism matters within the black community, not just outside of that. And you've got to find the right colored person, the right shaded person, I guess is the point. And I feel like now, if I look at a lot of media today, I feel like there's almost like an overcompensation by some people to try to find the darkest black person they can to say, see, look, the person I picked to do the thing is very dark. I didn't pick someone light like Halle Berry, right? I picked someone who's very dark. I feel like there's some of that now, which in my mind goes back to what you talk about when you were younger, how you were almost always part of all the marketing material because you were the blackface, right? Are we now at a point to where people are trying to purposefully pick the darkest black person they can to kind of show people, look, I'm not racist. I've got to look, she's super black. Look, is that happening, or am I wrong?
I think that there could be an overcorrection, but I would say that mostly it's probably that you're just not used to seeing it so frequently that now it looks like intentional. Whereas, like, I think that what's happening is people are genuinely trying to be more inclusive. Like when you think about foundation shade ranges, when Fenty introduced 40 shades, all the like drugstore makeup brands were like, oh my God, well, we have 40 shades. I don't understand why everyone's shopping this Fenty. And it's like, well, of course you have 40 shades, but you only led with the lightest of the 8, right? The ones at the very start of the spectrum. But what Rihanna did, because she is a Black woman, she said, I'm going to speak directly to my community. So it looked like, if you weren't paying that much attention, oh my God, look how much makeup she's selling. All these Black women just want to buy her makeup. And it's like, well, someone finally just started talking to them. That's what it is.
So then does the internet kind of make this better or worse? Right? I feel like the internet kind of democratizes a little bit of marketing, a little bit of media. So the backroom people who were deciding who goes on the front of the magazine or who goes, as the stars in a TV show, I feel like, doesn't the internet kind of make them less powerful? Don't we have a little bit more power in deciding, well, no, we're not going to accept the people who you put up front. We're going to get mad and we're going to make our own thing, or we're going to put our own people up front, or whatever. We're going to go directly to the people. Doesn't democratization of the internet make this a little bit better?
I think so, but algorithms are quite racist. So if you look at who the top earners are on TikTok or the most followed, they'll all be thin white women and pretty much under 25. So thin, young, white. That is the formula. That is what brands are looking to use to capitalize on, to amplify. And so, yes, you can have a thin Black woman who will have like many of the same physical stats, but she'll have a smaller following and ultimately get paid less money. So in some respects, yes, the internet does help things. I think it helps build communities. I think it helps people find each other. I think it helps them feel less alone. But actually, the power structures are still replicated because the engineers, the people who build the algorithms, the executives who run the tech industry are largely white men.
But aren't a lot of them not only white, though? A lot of them are Asian, either South Asian, right? Indian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, right? South Asian, or also East Asian, Korean, Chinese, Japanese, a little bit done in the Philippines, but most of the people in the Philippines are not owning things. They're much more the workers. The owners, I think, are also South Asian and East Asian, and some parts Eastern European, which I don't know if that's good or bad when it comes to Black Americans. I don't know how Eastern Europeans think about Black Americans at all. I mean, maybe good, maybe not. I don't know. But isn't that making it, I guess what I'm saying is I feel like it's getting better and that the systemic issues that were super powerful in the past, I feel like they're not super powerful anymore. Because regardless of the situation, people want the algorithms want to make money, right? That's their goal. Eyeballs to make cash. If that means that the skinny white girl is the way of making cash, they go to skinny white girl, not because they care about skinny white girl, because that makes cash. But if more and more, I don't know, skinny Black girls or skinny Asian girls or whatever is the thing of the day, if more of them make money, won't the algorithms shift to that?
They haven't so far. I think that if you look at the long arm of history, of course, we've come a super long way. But I would say that, there will be women who are just 10 years older than me, not even that much older than me, who will be like, you're dealing with the same problems. Or they'll have daughters and be like, my daughter is dealing with the same problems. So it's like, yes, of course, like things are way better than like 1945 or 1935, but like not that much better than 2005.
Okay. So you think we've kind of stalled is kind of what you think? You feel like we've stalled a bit?
I think change is just slow. I think it really is.
Okay.
Like,
so I want to bring up that point because you brought up something which I think is very controversial in my view. I feel like you brought up something in your book about the idea of sometimes Black women using anger as a shield, as the self-defense mechanism. And you said that in your life, you had done it too, right? You had fallen for that. You had done it too. And again, I want to be very clear for anyone who reads your book, you are very open about, you have a lot of empathy for people who have wronged you. At the same time, you have empathy for yourself. You're like, look, I did some things I probably shouldn't have done. I thought they were the right thing at the time, and I screwed up and I shouldn't have done it. And you've even said, look, you have used anger in the past as a way of self-defense mechanism. So does that mean that the stereotype of the angry Black woman, is that a real thing created by culture? Or is it just how we see things or some combination?
Well, I think that anger is a human emotion and every single person has the capacity to be angry. I think that only some people have the privilege of having that anger accepted, and some other people have the disprivilege of having that anger criticized or scrutinized. So it's the way that the anger is received by the outside world that changes. Every single person has the ability to feel and access anger. But if I access anger, or like we'll use the Supreme Court as an example. When Brett Kavanaugh was doing his his hearings, the way that he was able to express emotion, including anger, frustration, sadness, whatever. I know that I would never be able to do that. Certainly not on a public stage, but I would feel even uncomfortable being like that in some private spaces. And so,
What do you mean by not being able to, right? I mean, I think since probably that I can remember, I mean, all I can remember, and TV, I can remember Clarence Thomas and Forward. That's all I can remember for Supreme Court. And I think in many of them, the nominee has been angry or upset. And I think in every case, they still got the job. They're still on the Supreme Court. The most recent, Brown is her name, if I remember, the most recent woman who, right?
Brown.
She's now, they beat her up on what is a woman, and she yelled, I'm not a biologist, and she still got on. I feel like the anger was accepted by all of them. Am I wrong on this? Clarence Thomas was mad. He called it a digital lynching. Is that what he called his thing? He called it a digital lynching. I feel like they all got angry.
The way that Ketanji Brown handled her questioning versus the way that Brett Kavanaugh handled his questioning, it was almost like completely different, like night and day. So, she was a little snarky and kind of smart with people, but certainly not able to sputter and cry and, like claim that she was a victim of anything. And so when we have Black people whose anger or whose emotions are actually punished and criminalized, and I have several examples of what that looks like in my book, you learn that it's not safe for you to be angry or safe to express emotion. So once you see that, you learn to temper your feelings and how they're expressed. And that is what the issue is.
But in your book, you mentioned that there are a lot of angry Black women. And you were saying that, if I remember I don't remember the details, you'll hopefully correct me if I'm wrong on this. What I remember from the book was you were mentioning how sometimes the frustration or the self-defense before you get attacked, right? Defending yourself before you get attacked, that many Black women will take on that anger as a self-defense mechanism, and they'll actually be angry or even hurt other Black women or hurt other women in general. They'll hurt almost anybody except the white guy, right? That they will hurt other people. Is that real? And my point is, I'm not going to blame the person for accepting a self-defense mechanism. If they feel attacked, people create self-defense mechanisms. That's human in all of us, right? Is that more common in Black women, or is that just the stereotype is what I'm asking?
I wouldn't say it's more common, but in particular, what that referenced was this idea that we need to do more scholarship around meanness. So there was this whole
got it.
movement, okay. I would say in the mid-aughts, there was a book that was written called Queen Bees and Wannabes. And it was kind of a study of teenage girls and how they interact with each other and form interpersonal relationships. And it's kind of this like vying for power within them. That was then made into a satirical movie. It's called Mean Girls. And so you notice that Mean Girls are always white. Mean Girls are the Blair Waldorf on Gossip Girl. Mean Girls are, Lindsay Lohan, Rachel McAdams et al. And so there is no study to look at Black women who are trying to get a place in a social standing and have to adopt those kind of behaviors in order to gain the power necessary to have that social standing. And so I wouldn't say that it's any more so or less so than white women or any women of any other race, but of course, because it doesn't have to do with whiteness, it's just not looked at as closely or carefully.
Okay. You've also put the idea that sometimes when you're in a situation where it's more than one race in the same room or in the same environment, that a lot of Black people don't want to talk about race. Because if you talk about race, you make people feel uncomfortable and it never ends well. Do you still think that's true? And I say that because I feel like more and more people, particularly people of color, are talking about race. I see it more in mainstream media. I see it more in TV shows. I see it more in comedy specials. I see it more in news anchors talking about it. Your book talks about race a lot. I mean, it's a big part of your book. There's female issues also, and male issues, and school issues, and fact issues also in your book. But a huge chunk of your book is talking about race, right? So we're doing it now, right? I feel like it's a lot better now. Am I wrong in this?
I think it depends on how safe you are, right? So right now I work for myself. I'm self-employed. But when I worked at Condé Nast, I would not say I had the same freedom to do this. And I probably would not, talk about race in the same way. Like, it's just like, could I lose my employment? Or am I going to lose my health insurance? Like, these are real practical material things that make my life easier. And it's like, am I going to risk that? Like, even though I know what is going on or I know what's right, it's like, is it feasible for me to live without income? Is it feasible for me to live without health insurance? Is it feasible for me to become the office enemy or the school enemy? Probably not. So that's why a lot of people don't, especially when they are aligned with elite institutions who choose to keep issues of race quiet.
But if that's the issue, now I'm going to feel bad, because you use a phrase called PWI, predominantly white institutions. And using that phrase, you also bring up the idea that if I don't do what you just said, right? If I work for one of these PWIs and I don't do what you say, what you just said to do, I don't bring it up, and I don't, then I'm an accessory. Then I'm making things worse, right? Because I'm joining in the bad stuff. So then how do we change the PWI? How do we fix it if we can? If we can't say what we want to say because we're afraid of going to get fired or not get promoted or whatever is the thing we're worried about, right? Or get the wrong route if I'm a truck driver or whatever the punishment is, right? I'm afraid I'm going to get that punishment. Or do I just say, I don't care, I'm just going to only work for Black-owned businesses? Is that what I have to do? Or do I have to work for myself? We're going to quit and write books? I mean, what do we do?
Well, I think you have to stop looking at it as an individual problem and start looking at it as a systemic problem, because you as the individual did not cause this. You are walking into it. And so that's why I try not to judge people for the things they're doing for survival in a system that was never designed to accommodate them in the first place. Systemic racism is the institution's problem to fix. And so if the institution, even if it is a predominantly white institution, is saying, hey, we're welcome to everyone, we are inclusive, this is what we stand for, then I think that it is on people collectively to hold these institutions accountable, right? It cannot just fall on one individual. It's impossible that person's going to be able to carry some sort of mission across the finish line. But like if you work at an office, things like employee resource groups are a really good place to start. So they usually have them based on certain identifying factors. So there'll be an LGBTQIA plus group, there'll be a Black group, there'll be an Asian group, there'll be a Latino group. There are things that you can join so that you can feel like, you're not so alone. And that is an institution's job to provide those safe spaces and make sure that, people feel okay accessing them, which is why I'm a DEI consultant now.
I could see that if you're in a large organization. What happens when you're a small business? How does the guy or gal who runs a bakery and has, 2 employees, and one of the employees is Black, the other employees, their son who's white or whatever, right? Or the cousin or the nephew, whatever, right? Who's white. How do they do that? There's no affinity group to be had, right? There's no resource group to be had. It's just,
but
Bob and Jerome. That's all it is.
There's so much information and education out there. So I think that like saying, I don't know, and having that be kind of a blanket excuse is not really acceptable, especially as a business owner. If you are someone who is catering to a community who who has employees, like it is your responsibility to serve those employees in the best way possible. And that includes learning what their needs are. Like it's the same as if you know, and I think that the government actually has a role in making sure that this is getting carried out, you know, like we need to make sure that
you know I'm a libertarian, right? You know I'm a
I
libertarian,
did
right?
not know that. I did not know that.
You just insulted me, but go ahead.
I'm so
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
But
It's totally fine. Go ahead.
You know, if you are a business and you only have stairs to get into your business, someone can sue you and say, you don't have a ramp. There's no way I can get here. And you can be like, well, that's not fair because the law will say you need to put a ramp in here. You can't operate like this. It's not accessible to people. And we're not really.
But hold on. Now, I want to walk down this road because you bring up something. You talk about two separate issues. I'm going to bring up the ramp piece and then this one. You bring up the idea of white supremacy, but you also bring up the idea of blackness. So you have said that blackness is not a monolith. Like it's not a monolith, that you can be black and not be what someone says being black is, right? I define black as X. You can go, no, it's X minus 1 or X plus 10, right? You don't get to tell me that.
Yeah.
I think whiteness, could be the same way, right? There are many, whiteness can be a similar way. But when it comes to someone like, I need a wheelchair, that's kind of crystal clear, right? Like you physically can get upstairs or you can't. So I definitely understand the idea of saying, well, look, I need to be, you know, if I'm going to support this community, I should have a way for people who are in wheelchairs to get into my store. I get that.
Right.
That is clear. But then how do you decide that I'm supporting the blackness of my people, my employees, or I'm being too white or not white enough, or whatever is the thing that we're going to say here? How in the world can you possibly measure that? And if I get scared, here's my worry. And I see it in New York City already. I already see it. I live in New York City. I'm a business consultant in New York City. I see it already. There are many small businesses who are self-selecting and not hiring people who they're afraid are troublemakers because they're worried that they're going to get sued. And a small business goes out of business with one lawsuit. That's the end. They're finished with one lawsuit. So they're self-selecting, not because they care or don't care about the person of color or the woman or the whatever, because they don't feel they understand and they feel like they're just going to get trapped. That is their worry. I don't get it. I'm going to be trapped. I'm going to collapse. That is their worry. So how do we fix that, right? So that a business owner can go, if you tell me what this thing is, I'll do it. But if I don't know what the thing is, I'm scared. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to walk away.
Well, in the same way that there's no one way to run a business, like I think every entrepreneur will tell you, hey, I did this. Someone else like, I did another thing. Someone else like, I did something completely different. You need to be flexible in how you approach it. But if you don't try it all, you're being discriminatory, and that's illegal. You have to, you have to try.
Scary to me. That's still scary to me though, right? Particularly, what if I'm gonna, I'm scared because I'm gonna,
driving a car
I'm gonna mortgage my house so I can open up my coffee shop. And now I'm scared that if I get sued by somebody, I'm scared that I'm going to lose my house and my family and everything. Wouldn't it be easier if there was like a list of, here are the 6 things? And okay, I can do that, right? I got the 6 things. Like when it comes to the ADA, to your other point, which I'm with you, there's the real list. Yeah. Do this, do that, do this. I know when putting in the ramp has to have a certain percentage and blah, blah, blah. And the owner knows, okay, this is how I put the ramp in. This is what I do. My worry is when it comes to this, whiteness, blackness, Hispanicness, Asianness, insert thing here, whatever is the issue. My worry is we're setting up a system that is so unclear, we're going to make people afraid. And one of the things is going to happen. Less people will open up small businesses, option 1. And or 2, there's going to be a shadow racism that will pop up, or sexism. I'm not even racist, maybe even sexism, maybe both. A shadow racism or sexism that will pop up because of fear, right? I'm scared if I hire the Hispanic woman, she's going to sue me. So I'm only going to hire the other guy, or I'm only going to hire family. Is that not a real fear?
I mean, I think it's already happening, but I also think that, There are people like myself, other DEI consultants who are actively trying to work with people, right? And I think it usually does take an individualized approach. But one, people have to think it's worth the investment. And two, the opposition to try to make this kind of fantasy that we don't need this, or we don't need to talk about it, or it doesn't need to exist is so strong that it makes it very difficult for people to want to buy in the first place.
Does it matter that certain people, particularly older people, who will look back for the 60s and 70s and say, it's so much better? Does it matter that there are two responses to that? Response one is, you're right, it's better, and we could do even better. Let's keep going, right? It's better, you're right. It's not the 70s, that's true. Can we do better? And it's the old, no, you're old, you're a racist. And I feel like when you hear the second one, that's not what you're saying. Because you've been talking about empathy a lot, which I love the empathy that you're talking about. Empathy says, yes, it's better. You're right. And well done, right? Good. We're better. We're not done. We got to keep going. But I also hear the, no, you're old, you're a racist. And when we hear that, I think there are a lot of people who go, well, then why am I bothering? I can't do it. I'm not going to bother. Is that something you see, or is that just me because I'm in my 50s? Is it just me?
I think what people fail to understand is that white supremacy touches almost everything that we interact with, and it also harms everyone at the same rate. An analogy that I use in my book is like, imagine a town, and this town's water supply has been poisoned for generations. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden, because I'm young, I get to say, I'm not sick. My grandparents were sick, but I'm not sick. I'm not sick like them. Look, I'm fine. But it's like, of course you're sick. You might not have the same symptoms. You might not manifest in the same way, but you're sick because you're drinking poisoned water. White supremacy is poisoned water. It is touching all of us all the time. And so the counter to that is that we need to make sure that we are aware of that and challenging it and trying to expose it whenever we can. And we can't ever give up on that. Because also,
go ahead.
How it evolves is just so quick, right? It will, like, even if you look at the long arm of history, like we can look at from slavery to Reconstruction to civil rights, like even the hop from Reconstruction to Jim Crow and civil rights was so sophisticated, well coordinated, and fast. Like, it's crazy how fast that worked. And
yes, but look, let me be libertarian for a minute. You are correct in what you just said. And all of that was government sponsored. All of that was government institutions. All of that was government doing it. Because the reality of it is, there's a reason why they had to mandate segregation. Because if they didn't make a law, we would have integrated. Because humans integrate. That's what we do. There's evidence of that everywhere whenever you don't have systemic rules and regulations that physically stop you. You just let people integrate, they tend to do so. It's a common thing. So it was the government that made Jim Crow laws. It was the government that made segregation laws. It was the government that went in and burned down all the Black Wall Streets, either law enforcement and or military that went in. The individual white people didn't care. It was the government that gave them the carte blanche to go do so. It was the government that deputized them to go in and burn these places and lynch these people. These were all cops and military members is all that they were. I mean, most of the KKK were police officers, right? That's what all sheriffs, right? Whatever. They were law enforcement. Most of them were. This is all government doing this. So this is why I always worry about government trying to help us, because government has historically been the biggest oppressor systemically, obviously. So, I mean, there have been horrible individual monsters, obviously, right? There are individual monsters who do horrible things. Of course, I'm not taking anything away from that. But the most horrible individual who is in the most horrible things has done nothing close to what the government has done with systemically segregating us, systemically redlining us, systemically denying us loans and money and wealth, imprisoning us, all the things. So whenever you bring it up, I'm always going to give you a pushback. I'm not sure government's the answer. I'd rather there be 10,000 individual Danielles than one law, because 10,000 Danielles can change people. Laws will always wind up putting us in jail somehow. That's how I worry. Laws will always wind up putting us in jail somehow or hurting us somehow. That's my worry. I'm sorry, I'm clearly biased, but that's how I feel. I'm sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I think that sometimes though, like you got to work with what you got. I'm like short of like burning it all down. I'm like, these are the structures that we have. So we got to work with what we got.
I want to then go to the idea that we brought up. We brought up a lot of white supremacy. In fact, before I do that, let me do some admin if I could. Guys, if you like what you're hearing, if you think it's interesting, then do me a favor, click that like button right now. It's the way I get past the algorithms. The algorithms. It's how I get past them. So please click the like button. It does matter. If you happen to be watching on Twitter, please retweet this. We do this right now if you can. If you want to follow Danielle, she's been so good. She's given us all this time, given us all this information. Please follow her on Twitter at Danielle Prescod. And if you're listening to this on a podcast, DaniellePrescod on Twitter. And also check this show description. Her website's there. Check out what she's doing. Please do that. It does matter tremendously. But more importantly for all this, you want to support the show? Head over to theadvocates.org. Head over to them. They sponsor the show. Take one of their surveys or the world's smallest political quiz, whatever you want, and then share your results. In fact, there is one on, there's one on, There's one on police. There's one on political correctness, identity politics. There's all types of surveys. Take them, and when you're done, share them online. It's free. It takes about 4 to 5 minutes to do one of the surveys. It's free. It makes the advocates happy. It makes you happy. It supports the show and costs you nothing. It's free, but it supports the show. So please help me out if you would. Let me go to the other piece. The idea of, we talk about white supremacy. Let me talk about blackness. You've said it's not a monolith. I agree. In my own world, I have found, my father was black. My mom was white. So as I get older, I find myself, it's going to sound stupid, but I'm being very forward, kind of being blacker, only because I'm becoming my dad. So I think that's what's kind of actually happening to me, right? But as a little kid, all my friends were black. Well, some Hispanic, but almost all were black. But then when I moved to Long Island when I was 12, almost all my friends were white. So everything shifted. So as a teenager, I did things like played hockey, which black people don't play, right? So yeah, so I did that, right? So things that, were different. But now, as I get older, I feel comfortable in both worlds. But they don't always feel comfortable with me. What I mean by that is, I don't mind going back to the Bronx. I do sometimes. It's where I grew up. I feel comfortable in the Bronx. I still, to this day, feel comfortable if I go back in the Bronx, walk around, I feel fine. But they don't always feel fine with me. Like they know I don't live there anymore. I haven't been there in decades as living there. Yeah. And I think part of it is, do they think I'm black enough? And I think many of them don't. I think many of them don't think I'm black enough. They think I'm not one of them anymore, if that makes any sense, right? I think many people do believe that of me. You brought that up too. Sometimes you said you didn't feel black enough. And then sometimes you said the reverse, where you felt like you had to try to get accepted by the black community you had to feel that sometimes. Tell me about that. How does that blackness affect you? Someone who, you didn't grow up in the hood and you're supposed to be as hood as someone says you are, whoever that person is who decides you're supposed to be hood enough. Or as when I grew up, it was called the ghetto. So we had to be ghetto enough, but now it's called the hood, whatever. So how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that, one thing that, again, just hasn't really been explored enough is the ways that financial privilege can change how people perceive you, especially when it comes to race. So, on Twitter a few weeks ago, Howard Stern on his show was saying how annoyed he was that Oprah has staff. She does all these things. And a lot of the conversation was, well, is Oprah black? And I'm like, this is so crazy. Of course, Oprah is Black and Oprah is a billionaire. Why should she not have staff to help her run her home? Like, it doesn't make sense. But I think that really a lot of the issue is wrapped up in us just not, that's not normalized for us yet, right? Like, it's like seeing that has not been comfortable for everyone. So not comfortable for someone like Howard Stern, and certainly not comfortable within our own community to be like, oh, is this okay? Like, whenever somebody gets a lot of money, especially when they emerge from Black community, like even Cardi B from the Bronx, they become othered, right? It's like they leave, and then it's like now there is such a drastic disconnect between where they used to be from and like where they are now. And people, it's like a wild thing. But I grew up with that disconnect. So it was already baked into my existence. I didn't necessarily like make one generational hop and say, okay, I'm the rich one. Like, I grew up with a certain level of privilege.
Your family was already educated, and most of your friends, when you were younger, most of your friends were white, most of your childhood and even your career. Is that correct?
Yeah, everyone in my family, my grandparents went to college, right? Like this is like years and years and years of building. And so for me, I was like, of course I know we're Black, but like that was like within our family. But I'm sure like my uncles, my aunts, like everybody who had to participate in the wider world also was getting the same kind of questions. Why do you talk like that? Why do you play tennis? Why do you ride horses? Why do you do all these things?
Yes.
And I'm like, of course, Black people can and do these things, but it's not publicized enough, right? It's not shown enough. So people look at it as alien and foreign.
Yeah, I know it's weird. People are like, Larry, you're a better baseball player than you are a basketball player. What's wrong with you? So yes, I have the same issue. So yes, if you see my picture on YouTube, it's me throwing a baseball. It's not me with a basketball. So yes, it's absolutely true. So I get that. But with that in mind, right? I mean, with that idea that your family, and no shame, I'm happy, good for you that your family has been educated. Mine was not, right? Neither my mother didn't graduate high school. My father didn't go to college. I was the first person in my family to go to college, right? So, but either way, there's a disconnect. So I feel like this is a Black thing. And this is why I believe this. And you tell me if you think I'm wrong. When you look at the Black community in America, Black American culture, because of our slave past and then Jim Crow, is really a poor culture. Like that's our culture. It's being poor because we were slaves and then poor for literally a century, right? Most of us, I should say. Not all of us, obviously, but most of us were. If you look at other cultures and other immigrant classes, other immigrant groups who've come to America, I feel most of them look back at their culture, not as a poor culture, but just as a different culture, right? So if you're Mexican American, your culture is Mexican. That isn't necessarily poor. It's just Mexican, right? They're rich Mexicans, poor Mexicans, whatever Mexicans, right? If you're Italian, right? Italian American, they're poor Italians, rich Italians, whatever. But I feel like in many cases, the poor culture in America is the Black culture. So by becoming wealthy or speaking the way you speak, aren't you kind of in a way dissing the culture in many people's minds? Am I making sense of what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I also think that has to do with representation as well. I think that, there were certain people who definitely wanted the narrative that Blackness and poverty are so deeply intertwined. Like, I don't necessarily know how universally true that is. But it was certainly the intention of things like redlining and segregation. Yep. And, sure. Making sure that loans were not given, home ownership was impossible, business ownership was impossible. Like that was the intention. It wasn't always executed perfectly, but, I don't think I think that was given to Black people. I don't think, right? Like, and same with like the narrative of slavery. Like the fact that we get to choose our own clothes, that we can walk down the street and smile at people. Like, I live in Louisiana now, so I feel like this weird, like, it's like a living history all the time. Like, Louisiana, New Orleans is a very strange city.
Yep, I've been there.
When it comes to that. So I'm like, wow, like, look at how different my life is. But like, of course, like,
So
when you really,
let me walk down another road then. So then how do we, since I think you're right, our culture was taken from us as slaves, obviously, right? And then given the poor culture, here's your culture, good luck, take it. This is what we're giving you. And not having any culture stripped away from us from Africa, we took it, right? There's nothing else. We took it. And that's what we did.
and
I get
something
that.
very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. So now this goes to the other thing you brought up, which is cultural appropriation. This one I struggle with, because if we, there are some aspects that are obvious to me, but so many that aren't, and I worry about them. And let me give you a couple pieces here. Number one is, if Blackness isn't easily defined as a monolith, it becomes challenging for me to say, well, this is cultural appropriation or not. And then the other piece is, what is cultural appropriation and what is just loving it and copying it because you love it, right? Another piece, right? What is that too? And then when I look back at the past and I see things like Elvis Presley, okay, obvious cultural appropriation, right? Clear as day, got it, right? No one's going to argue that one, right? But today I hear people get upset because a white girl gets dreadlocks, right? Or a white guy gets dreadlocks, and a black girl gets, a white girl gets a traditionally a braid that makes her hair look like, many black women would get a braid. And then people get angry and call it cultural appropriation. I say to myself, is it really, or is it that the white guy's trying to have some solidarity with black people? I don't know the white guy. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. Maybe he's a racist. I don't know. I'm saying, but we're assuming that it's cultural appropriation. That's not Elvis, right? That's not Elvis. They're not making the black people do the music, not paying them, and then having Elvis sing it and paying him. So how do we square that circle?
Well, in a way they are, like, it's all related. So the reason why people would get upset for a white woman wearing a hairstyle that is traditionally black, it is because it is still discriminating against someone for their hair texture or style is still legal in several states. Like, there is the Crown Act, which is protection against discrimination for someone saying, we're not going to hire you. We're not even, your hair must conform to whatever standard, to work at this place or to attend school here. So kids will get sent home. Your hair is disruptive, or there's like many viral videos of kids getting their hairs cut at sporting events saying it doesn't comply, right? The thing that naturally grows out of your head, or like a style that is reflective of your culture. What happens is when white people do that and there is no protection and they're not interested in making sure that people whose hair should look like that are able to do it safely and comfortably, it is appropriative. You get to benefit from accessing a culture which people who are in it cannot comfortably access in the same way. You're abusing privilege. So if the white person with dreadlocks is also making sure that he's writing to legislators every day being like, yep, the Crown Act must be passed. Like, it is very important that this hairstyle is normalized, that we see it many more places, that people who, I don't know, do any kind of.
But hold on. Whether that guy's doing that or not, the person who's mad at him doesn't know. So that white guy might be doing that, and maybe not. I don't know the white guy, right? Maybe he's writing to his congressperson every day. Maybe he doesn't care at all. I don't know. But if he's on the street, he's getting yelled at, and he's getting yelled at in a city like New York. And that's dumb. In New York City, I know, I've been here for decades. You're not discriminated based upon your hair. That's not a thing in my city. Now, that maybe in Louisiana, I don't know how Louisiana works. I don't know that. Maybe it is. But I'm 100. I do hiring and firing. Like, I'm a business consultant. You are not discriminated in New York City because your hair is long or short, or because you look like you have a traditional African hair or Hispanic or whatever. Not a thing here. Not a thing when it comes to most things, right? It's very rare. It does happen, don't get me wrong. It's not zero. But relative to the rest of the country, nothing. Again, compared to the rest of the country. And still in New York, people be upset. Oh, how dare you wear that? What do you, there's no discrimination here. You can be a white guy with dreads or a black guy with dreads and get hired. It's not a thing here in New York City. And I guess that's where I'm biased here, Danielle. I'm biased because I'm in New York City. So that's where I live. So I'm a bit biased in this.
Well, I think there is discrimination anywhere. You know, CNN had released a study that said they interviewed, I don't even know, hundreds of hiring managers. And they said, would you hire someone with an afro? And they would, I mean, an insane percentage of them said they would not even interview someone with an afro. And like hair politics are very deep and it's very long. And so we are not in a place where we can comfortably just be borrowing, especially if you have the privilege to wear your hair another way. It's just disrespectful. And that's why people are upset about it.
And that's cultural appropriation in your view?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it takes from a culture and benefits the individual without having to actually engage with that culture.
Okay, but wouldn't it be better? And maybe I'm wrong here, and I'm happy to be wrong here. Wouldn't it be better if more white guys had dreadlocks and normalized dreadlocks, and then black guys have dreadlocks too, and nobody would care? Wouldn't that be a better thing if lots of white guys said, "Hey, we want dreadlocks," and so a bunch of white guys had dreadlocks? That became the norm. So when black guys have dreadlocks, nobody cares because we all have dreadlocks. Wouldn't that be a good thing?
I mean, you can look at many things that I think have been overtaken by white men, right? Like sneaker culture, for example. You can wear sneakers on a red carpet. That is not great, but like it doesn't necessarily serve or overcorrect the harms that were done to Black people. Like they are not afforded the same privileges. So whereas like a Black man,
aren't they now though? But hold on, aren't they now? In other words, we'll go use sneaker culture. When I was growing up as a kid, right, sneakers was not a thing, right? You wore sneakers because you were running, right? That's right. That wasn't a thing, right? Sneaker culture started happening as I got older. And most of it was the cool kids, right? It was the cool rappers. It was Run DMC with the Adidas, right? That was the cool thing, right? So the cool Black rappers were able to wear Adidas, which was the cool thing of the day, and start wearing sneakers. The white kids in the 90s were like, man, this is cool. We want to do the sneaker thing too, because we think Ice Cube is the coolest guy in the world, because we all want to be gangsters because we're white kids who live out in the suburbs. So then the white kids in the suburbs started wearing the sneakers that Ice Cube was showing up on the video, right? Whatever the case may be, or trying to wear Timberlands or whatever they were trying to wear, right? Was that still a thing in the 90s? Maybe. Whatever was the thing, right? The white kids wearing it. And as the white kids wore it, didn't it make it normal? I mean, Seinfeld used to wear sneakers in his 90s TV show. He used to wear sneakers there. Didn't the white kids picking up Black culture normalize Black culture? Isn't that a benefit?
No. What it did was just give them access and essentially cool points for doing something that Black people don't necessarily get credit for. And I think, Black people know this. There is not a thing you can wear. There is not a way you can do your hair. There's nothing that you can do, a way you can project yourself that will protect you from racism. Not one single thing. It does not matter. So that's why it's appropriative, because you're still vulnerable in so many ways. And a white person gets to cherry pick what parts of you they want to try on for fun and still be protected and still not be thought of as a quote unquote thug, right? Still be like respected. Whereas like a Black person, oh no, all of a sudden the dress code is applied only to you. Oh, no jerseys in here. Oh, no Timberlands in here. Oh, that white guy's in here, but I can't come in. Interesting. It has to do with what we're wearing though, right? It doesn't have to do with what we're wearing. We can wear the same exact thing and our privileges are still different because of the way that racism functions.
Okay, maybe I don't see it. Maybe it's where I live. I don't see that at all. This is something that I don't experience. I'm not doubting your experience. Perhaps that's what you experience. I haven't. And maybe that's why I feel the way I feel. I haven't experienced that type of the white guy gets to wear the jersey and the black guy doesn't. I have not experienced that. Now, don't get me wrong. When I was a kid, I did, right? I did see that as a kid, right? When me and my white friends were all pulled over, I was the only one who got to sit in the back of the police car, right? So I have dealt with that in the past, right? I do. But now I don't see anywhere near that much when it comes to the cultural side, right? The idea of dress or hairstyle. Maybe it's the city I live in. So, okay, let's move on to the other piece that I really liked what you said, which was the idea that there are so many companies that rely on black dollars without respecting the black customer. And that I saw openly as wrong, cultural appropriation, erasure, whatever bad word. And I think that's true. And I've seen that in companies I've worked with, but not just with black. I've also seen it with gay community also. Companies that don't actually like gay people, but sell to gay people as no tomorrow. And I've seen that. I've personally seen that happen, right? And that I've personally seen. I know of it in other worlds also, obviously. They sell to the black community, don't give a damn about the black community. Sell to the gay community, don't give a damn about the gay community. This has got to be very hard because if you're part of the black or gay community, whatever the community is, you like the product. So you obviously buy it because you like it, but you're disrespected. I mean, that's got to be terrible.
Well, most consumers are not that informed, unfortunately. Like, truly, when people are consuming things, like they're not really thinking too critically about it, which is why conscious consumption is really important. But that's a skill that needs to be developed. And it really is not when the only thing we care about is consuming, period. Like, not, especially not consciously. That's definitely a no-no. But yeah, it's really
I want to look good. I don't care what happened. I just want to look good. I don't care.
Yeah. And if the price is right, fine. I'll, and so a lot of that is, again, an education piece and like people realizing that as consumers, they have like way more power than they realize. And that they should use.
You've been through a lot. Your book is long with a lot of interesting stories. So, and by the way, if those of you who want to, let me do a bit of admin if I could. If you want to follow Danielle and check out her book, please do so. Danielle Prescod at Twitter. Check out what she's doing. Her information is in the description if you want to check out some details of what she's doing. And of course, if you like what you're hearing, click the like button so that people can share this, people can watch it. If you're watching on Twitter, please retweet this right now. But you've been through a lot. Now, with hindsight, right, looking back, did it make you stronger? Did it make you weaker? Are you glad you went through it? Are you not? Would you change a lot? I mean, now you're looking back with hindsight, right? You did what you thought was right then. Now you look back. What do you say?
I said, this is the only way I know how to live, right? And like there's not, I think that my therapist always said, if you obsess about the past, that's depression. If you obsess about the future, that's anxiety. The only thing you can do is like be present and like know that I'm very grateful for the things that I've learned and the ways that I'm able to grow. I think everyone experiences pain in their lives and to varying degrees in hard times. And I think that as adults, our responsibility is to understand our circumstances, what happened to us, and make sure that we don't harm other people in the process. So that's what I try to do. I try to make sure that I repair any harms that I've done and not commit new ones. And so
with that in mind, how does someone, particularly someone who's Black in America, right? Particularly that, but anyone, but particularly someone who's Black, if Black is not a monolith, and if Blackness, is not a monolith, and if we want to feel accepted by the Black community, how do we become ourselves, right? How do we be ourselves when there isn't a monolith. And no matter what we do, someone's going to say you're not black enough, right? Someone's going to say you're not black enough. And someone's going to say you're too black for me, right? No matter what, that's going to happen. Somebody's going to say you're too black. Someone's going to say you're not black enough. How can you be yourself?
Well, I put this in the book. I think one thing that makes it easier for me is I'm like, some people don't like Beyonce. Like, you could be as perfect, you know? And I'm like, they hate her. And I'm like, you just can't please everybody. And understanding
if you don't like Beyonce, you have a problem, is all I'm saying. You have a problem. You got to like Beyonce. But anyway, guys, I'm sorry. Keep going. Sorry.
You know, like that's a reality. Like, it's like someone who has incredible dedication, the way she does her art, people are like, I hate it. I don't like it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But knowing that helps me, because I'm like, look, I'm not going to be perfect, but I just have to be myself. And it's so worth it. Going on a self-love journey and truly understanding what that means is so worth it. Like, we only have one life. Why bother trying to please everyone else?
Okay. Let me grab a couple of comments, if you don't mind. John Morrissey says he liked different strokes. I agree, but by the way, it wasn't different strokes. It was different strokes. There was a apostrophe in it. He actually spelled it like that. So yes, that was cute. And that was kind of mixed. That was black kids, white family, right? There was some of that. And originally the Jeffersons came off of Archie Bunker's show, All in the Family. So they kind of mixed black and white there. So there was some of that, I think. So yes. Gene says, I used to let my eldest son stay up to watch Cosby. I feel like Cosby was a big deal. And I think it was a big deal because it showed an example of black families that wasn't often shown in the media in general, right? Even when you showed Good Times, Good Times was a popular show. Jefferson's was a popular show. But in both cases, they either were in the ghetto or came out of the ghetto, right? In the case of Cosby, they didn't come out of the ghetto. I thought that was a different thing. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I don't really remember. I was like a little young, but I think that, yeah, it was what, a doctor father, a lawyer mother, and a million kids. That was a lot of kids. Yes. I'm like, so you had to have a lot of money, I guess. Like, what is it, 6 kids or something like that? That's a lot.
Yep. Absolutely.
A lot.
I agree. So the Cray Flamingo says, I'm not sure if I agree. I grew up watching The Cosby Show. I was moving on up. I grew up in a rural white town in New York. I grew up giving my basketball shoes to the black girl who couldn't afford them. I dated a black man for years. People make an opinion without color in the mix. I think the individual. Say it again. I'm sorry.
This is what we call white saviorism. It's a cataloging of all the things that you have done for black people to demonstrate that you're not racist. Like, no one counts good deeds. Either do it because you're a nice person, or like do it because you want to date that person. But like, you don't get to like catalog them and say, let me go back in my.
Why shouldn't I be able to say, hey, I'm not a bad guy towards so-and-so because I've done the right thing towards the group of people, right? Or, the Schindler's List, right? The Schindler's List. Schindler was, for those who don't know, I'm sure you've probably seen the movie, most of you have. Schindler was literally a member of the Nazi Party in Germany. He benefited from Jewish slave labor. He said so openly. He did so. But he also saved literally thousands of Jews. He literally saved the lives of thousands of Jews. So was he part of Nazi culture and the ultimate in white supremacy? Clearly. And he openly benefited from it. He was a member of the Nazi Party. He benefited from slave labor of the Jewish people. He completely did so. And he saved thousands of Jews. And I would think the vast majority of Jewish population will look at him as a hero. I mean, he's buried in Israel. People still go to him. And for many Jews, not all, obviously, for many Jews, he's a hero. He's cataloging, and his is like lives. Isn't that fair?
I mean, I don't know. I am not Jewish, so it's not really my place to have an opinion on that. But I will say that for that example of what that person just did, it centers themselves. It's a very insidious way of thinking, like it's an extension of abuse of privilege. It's like, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but Larry, I'm so sorry.
How does one defend themselves, right? So what if someone were to say to the crayfish and go, hey, you're a racist, right? And they were to say it to that person. How does one defend themselves against the attack of being a racist? How does one defend themselves if they don't catalog the good deeds they've done? What can they do?
Being called a racist is not a permanent state of being. It is something that you can correct and move forward. Like someone calling me a mean girl. I was a mean girl. I'm going to own it. And I'm not a mean girl anymore. So I can look at.
But how do you know you're not a mean girl anymore?
Because I have corrected that behavior. I know what was mean that I did, and I no longer do that. Same with racism. You have to know, you can't, but the kind of knee-jerk reaction to be like, I'm not a racist. I'm so sorry though. I want to talk about this more, but I have to go meet my pregnant friend. She's going to kill me. I'm supposed to be at dinner.
No, I'm sorry. I love the conversation. Let me wrap this up, guys. I apologize. Look, Danielle, thank you so much for giving me the time that you gave me. I'm sorry we went long because we were talking so much. We went long. I apologize. Guys, follow Danielle if you can on Twitter. Danielle Prescod, if you can. Everything you want from her, if you want to check her out, is actually in the description. Danielle, thank you so much for giving me the time you did. Let's stay in touch. No worries. Go. I will take care of some of the comments on my own. I will see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All righty. So, guys, let me keep going if I could. I'm sorry I couldn't get some of your comments. I didn't realize that she had a hard stop. I do apologize for that. Let me grab some more of your comments. Cray Flamingo, I got to tell you, I feel like what you're saying and cataloging, as she said, I don't feel like it's a bad thing. I think you should say the good things you've done in life. I don't think that cataloging is a bad idea. Obviously, she disagrees, and that's fine. I think it's totally fine. I think the fact that you would date someone of a different race, the fact that you would help someone of a different race, I think it does matter. And I know people will disagree with me, but I'm on your side for this one. I am. And I use the example of Schindler as, I think, a strong example of that. I think that matters. The bad things that Schindler did completely outweighed by the good things he did. Completely outweighed. And I think the vast majority of the Jewish population would agree with me on that one. I mean, he's buried in Israel. They still go see him. You're saving thousands of people. You made some money on the side. Who cares, right? I mean, maybe I'm wrong on this one. So yes. Patty says, I lived in a tiny little Crown Point, New York, had a 40-year-old neighbor who never, ever interacted with any person of color until my son came home from college with a few friends about 10 years ago. Look at that. I think that, I am looking at someone who is ignorant of understanding people. And I think it's not necessarily a bad thing that you got to grow at one point, don't you? So I think to your point, Patty, at one point, you kind of have to grow, don't you? At one point. So anyway, yes, let me grab a couple more of these if I could. Dave says, Black exploitation is the Black Grindhouse 1970s. There were a lot of them. I used to watch all of them. And to be forward, I was a kid, but I love them. And I tell this story to some of you. You might remember this from the past. When I was a kid growing up in the Bronx, I remember I was probably 7, maybe in that area of elementary school, maybe 7, when someone told me that Black people were a minority. I'm like, no, they're not. I didn't realize Black people were a minority. Everyone I knew was Black. They can't be a minority. Well, clearly I was uneducated in that regard, but yes. So that's good. Thank you for that. I do appreciate that. Dave also says, didn't Eddie Murphy put on whiteface? Yes. As part of a parody of a story, White Like Me on Saturday Night Live. He did. And so did Dave Chappelle, but not as good. Dave Chappelle was clearly doing whiteface. And also was the movie, the Wayans brothers, White Girls. No, White Chicks. White Chicks was the movie for the Wayans brothers who put on prosthetics to be white. So yes, I do remember that one. Gene says, fictional characters such as Little Mermaid can be any color. I do, however, have a problem accepting Black women as leader of Kattegat Norway during Viking times, such as in Vikings Valhalla. It doesn't mean I won't watch it, though. Well, I'm going to tell you how I feel about changing the race historically. My opinion, there are 2 ways that I think that makes total sense. Number 1, I talked about my other issue. If you're, in Nigeria doing a play in school, everybody's black. So all the Vikings are going to be black because all the kids are black doing a Viking play. I get that, right? In that case, makes total sense. Well, the other issue is when race has no bearing in what you're doing, and it's just for entertainment, like Hamilton, right? Hamilton is just an entertainment thing. Who cares if Hamilton's Puerto Rican or black, whatever? It's not really meant to be a historical documentary. It's meant to be entertaining. And, who cares? You can make them any color you want. In those two cases, I'm fine. But to your point, Gene, if I'm trying to make a historical documentary and I all of a sudden make, Eric the Red, an Asian guy, yeah, I'm kind of with you on that one. So if we don't care, who cares? So yes. All right. The Cray Flamingo also says, honestly, in the book, you can use your imagination. When I read a book, I don't see color. I think canon matters. And maybe it's because I'm a comic book guy, right? I loved comic books as a kid, right? And I still do, but I love them as a kid. And it does bother me when they change the characters too much in any way, not just race. But if like all of a sudden, Dr. Doom now loves flowers, I'm going to be pissed off. Dr. Doom, that's what's like flowers, right? I read the comic books. He doesn't like flowers. That's not his thing. But now to make Dr. Doom black or Asian or Hispanic, I'm not going to like it because Dr. Doom is the white guy from Laverternia, right? That's where he's from. He's the king, duke, whatever. He's the royalty from that country. That's where he comes from. Eastern Europe. That's where he comes from. So yeah, I do think canon matters. And I would rather always just make a new story, right? I would rather just make a new story. An example I'll give when I was a kid. When I was a kid, some of you who like comics may remember, there was a character called Deathlock the Demolisher. Came out in the 70s, maybe 70s. He was black and he was like a cyborg type. The DC copied by making Cyborg. It was a copy of Deathlock the Demolisher. Anyway, and I remember, oh yeah, it's cool. I remember Spawn came out in the 90s, early 90s, late 80s. Spawn came out, another black character. Loved it, right? And he wasn't like a sidekick. When Falcon came out, he was a sidekick to Captain America. That was what she was talking about. He was a token black character. I was never a Falcon fan. Now they've made Falcon a lot stronger in the Marvel universe now. But when I was a kid in the 60s and 70s, he was a sidekick, right? He was not the main character. But when they made Deathlock was the main character. Spawn was the main character, right? And I enjoyed the idea of having black main characters. I did. But they didn't all of a sudden turn Captain America black, right? They didn't just do that, right? There was a reason he was a different character. And they kind of did it now, right? Because Falcon did kind of become Captain America, kind of. But it wasn't because they just made him black. There was a reason. Falcon took over as Captain America walked away. Again, you wrote a story in, make the character whatever you want. I think it makes total sense. I'm actually okay with them making, again, I have another spot where they made Spider-Man Hispanic. Why? It's a different universe. So my Spider-Man that I grew up as a kid is still the white Peter Parker, but there's another cool Spider-Man. It's Morales, right? So it's fine, but he's a different universe. You wrote a different story, different origin story, different character. I'm in. I am totally in. I know some of you probably don't care, but I do think canon does matter. I do. And I'm not mad, be clear. I'm not mad at Little Mermaid. I'm not angry at this, right? I'm not going to shake my fist. I mean, it's a TV show. But if I cared about these things, if I had a connection to them, I would rather you write a new story, right? I'd rather you just write a new story and make new characters and make them whatever race, ethnic background you want. I would rather do that. So yes. Patty says, the problem with the term white America doesn't cover it all. I'm an Irish, Italian, Polish, Hungarian, Czechoslovakian American, and it's not fit one line. But I do think that white Americans also have the hyphen. I live in New York. There are a lot of people in New York who are very proud to be Italian American. Ask them, they will tell you more than once. There's lots of New York City people who are very proud to be Italian American, and they will tell you all the time. Greek American, absolutely. I think they don't call themselves white Americans. They don't. I mean, here and where I am, maybe where she lives, they do that. Maybe Louisiana, it's a thing. I don't know. Again, I only know where I am, and where I am, people do say Italian American, Irish American. They absolutely do. That is a thing. So, and in fact, they don't just say African American. If you're black in New York, there's a lot of black people in New York who aren't African Americans. They're Jamaican, Nigerian, right? They're all of the things. So you do find people who say, I'm West Indian. They don't say they're black. They say I'm West Indian, which means Jamaican, or maybe from Barbados or something like that. They'll say they're West Indian. That does happen here in New York City. So yes. Josh says, coming to America and Harlem Nights were trailblazing. Looking back. Agreed. These were main characters who white people watched, right? That's the issue. I feel like, and this is just my feeling, I have no data on this. I feel like there was a shift from Good Times to the Jeffersons. In my mind, if you're old enough, maybe you remember, I feel like Good Times was a heavily black audience, but Jeffersons began to shift into a more white audience. I feel like that. Maybe because it was a spinoff from All in the Family. I don't know, but I again, no data, just my feeling that more white people watched Jeffersons than watched Good Times. And then once we shifted into Family Matters, Fresh Prince, Cosby, I think it was a huge white audience. I think to this day, you'll find people who still did it. So yes. All right. Any case. Patty goes on to say change is extremely slow. I agree. She also says, I've seen many angry white women in my 62 years, have been one on a few occasions. Well, now I think we have that idea now of the Karen, right? Which is the angry white woman. But if you go back a few years, I think most people thought, oh, it was the angry black woman. The problem is, though, in general, right? This might be a sex issue or gender issue more than it is a racial issue, right? Maybe we just don't like, as a culture, angry women. They're bad or whatever. It could be that too, right? So when we see the angry black woman, we go, see, another angry black woman. But now when we see the white woman, we say the same thing. Another Karen. When maybe they have, maybe they don't, but maybe they have a real reason to be angry. Maybe they do, right? Maybe this person's angry for a real reason. I don't know. So, any case. All righty. Thomas says free is good. I would agree. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Josh says, it's because Bill destroyed the legacy of the Cosby Show. He did. Right now I say it, but I do feel weird about it. I do. Absolutely. So yeah, I am concerned about that. I think it did hurt. It did. Absolutely. So, all right. Let's see here. Patty says Jesus' race was most definitely changed for a good century and a half. Yeah, I think most people who are historians know that Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew. That's what Jesus was. He was a Middle Eastern Jew. He wasn't a white-haired blonde guy, nor was he a black guy. He was a Middle Eastern Jew of that time. That's what he was. So, whatever a Middle Eastern Jew looked like then is probably what he looked like, right? We could assume that. So yes. Missy goes on and says, I completely disagree with the cultural appropriation. I got to tell you, Missy, me too. I think Danielle's off on that one. I don't buy it. I don't buy the cultural appropriation. To me, it seems mean, if that makes any sense, right? So if I have dreadlocks and I get, I can't get a job because I have dreadlocks, and then you put in dreadlocks, I'm mad at you because you get to have dreadlocks. So now you can't. So now nobody can have dreadlocks. Let's change the system and let's normalize dreadlocks then, or whatever. That's how I feel. Obviously, Danielle disagrees with me. She thinks that I'm wrong on this one. It's fine. She has a right to feel as she feels. I disagree completely. I think you should have any hairstyle you want, regardless of whose culture you think you're appropriating. I don't think it matters at all. And I don't think that trying to be someone else is a bad thing, unless, and what I brought up was the Elvis issue. For those who don't know about what happened with the Elvis issue, is literally took black music from black musicians, did not pay them, gave it to Elvis. Elvis made tons of money off of it. That's cultural appropriation, right? Yes, literally took the music from someone else, gave it to a white guy. He made money on it. Okay, yes. But we're talking dreadlocks. Nowhere near that. We're talking dress. Nowhere near that. Sneaker culture. Nowhere near that. I think the opposite is true. I believe what I said is better. Now, look, again, not mad at Danielle. She's a savvy, smart woman. She believes what she believes, no worries. All I'm saying is the more mainstream whatever my culture becomes, the more freedom I'm going to have with my culture. So I feel cultural appropriation, I think, is actually a good thing. I think it's better. I think everyone should be able to wear dreadlocks. Everyone should be able to, put on a dashiki or whatever. If you like it, you should do so. I think that is a better thing for all of us. And again, I know she disagrees. Mrs. on my side, though. She says, perhaps the person isn't aware they're appropriating anything. How are they educated? How are we educated by anger? Plus individual liberty, individual liberty. I actually don't care if they know they're appropriating, as long as they're not taking somebody's idea or culture, stopping them from making money and then making money off of it, as did happen in the music industry 60 or 70 years ago. That actually happened 70 years ago. If that's happening, clearly cultural appropriation. I got you. But I'm wearing dreads. I'm not stopping you from wearing dreads. I want to wear a kimono because I like Japanese style. I want to put on a Japanese samurai sword. So I'm not. I mean, Japanese people literally got put in internment camps. They're not going there now. I don't see it. Right? I don't see that at all. I agree with you completely on that one. Guys, I want to say again, if you like this, I hope this was interesting for you, seeing a different view. I know many of you didn't agree with what she was saying. All good. Remember something. Danielle has been through a lot. Her book's interesting. If you want to read it, please read it if you want to. I did read it. As you can tell, I read every author I bring on, I read their book first, right? So I did read a book. A lot of interesting ideas in it. And it's how a lot of Americans feel and think. And we have to deal with all the issues that are there and how we can make more people feel comfortable having these conversations. I think we have to have conversations. And Joel says perfectly. Often when people talk about race, they're really talking about rich and poor and not race. Sometimes it's class and they call it race. You're right. But we have to have these conversations somewhere. You guys know I will never shy away from having any conversation with anybody. We have to do more of this. I hope you found it enjoyable. And if you did, click the like button. Follow me on Twitter, right? And then, of course, if you're watching on Twitter, please share it on Twitter so we can keep going. And of course, head over to my sponsors, theadvocates.org. Theadvocates.org, take one of their surveys, whatever one you want, right? Doesn't matter. Take one of them and share your results. Sharing your results supports the show. I need you to keep supporting the show, or I can't keep doing this. So please support the show. If you like what I'm doing, I hope you enjoy it. The Sanguine Safra sign says, this was great. I am very glad. Guys, I will be on Thursday. I'm off tomorrow, but I'll be on Thursday twice. I will see you all